Awesome. So, hi everybody. It's 10 a.m. in Auckland, New Zealand, and I'm going to be talking about Azure AD B2C and the migration kit to Entra External ID. So, just a bit of context. If you have a company with an online e-commerce site, the people inside the company doing Teams and SharePoint and M365, they'd be using Entra ID. But all your customers that buy stuff from you online would be using Azure AD B2C, which is the CIAM product, so customer identity and access management. And basically, it's massive scale. You know, you're talking like 400 million users in some cases, and also self-service, because you don't want 400 million people to contact your help desk. Now, there are hundreds of thousands of Azure AD B2C tenants, but Microsoft has decided that in 2030, they are going to turn it all off. And the successor that they are pushing is called Entra External ID. And so there's a huge amount of users and tenants and stuff out there that need to migrate to this new database. And that is obviously a huge job. So they have they've started to introduce a tool that does all this for you, or some of it for you. So there's a lot of things that you can migrate. You could obviously migrate users, you can migrate passwords, maybe using just in time. You can migrate email and username logins.
Hey, Ronnie, mate. Sorry. Ronnie. The team is telling me there's something wrong with the slides, as in you are sharing the slides from the other side, or like I can see migrate what right now.
Yeah.
This is the second slide, right?
Yeah, it says migrate what, and then underneath it says users, passwords. You can't see that because it's the same slide.
Yeah, I think I am seeing both slides, as in like the current slide, and then I'm not sure. I'm seeing like the presenter view, maybe.
Must I take off presenter view?
Oh yeah, so like right now we are seeing the presenter view. So yeah.
So how do you take off presenter view? I've never done that before. Is there a presenter view here? Oh yeah, there we go. Let me take that. Okay, it's turned off now.
Okay, and then present again.
If I now go from beginning,
right?
Is that
yeah,
better?
Yeah, it's so much better. Yeah, if you click next and next, yeah, sweet. That is brilliant.
You can see the whole thing. You can see the words now. Yes.
Yeah, it's all look good now. All look good.
Go ahead. Good. Okay.
Sorry for interruption.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah. No worries. Okay, so user flows you can sort of migrate, because the way B2C interacts with the user flow is different to the way that external does it, but you cannot migrate custom policies, which is a major feature in B2C, and that is causing quite a lot of angst, shall we say. Okay, so you can migrate your custom attributes, you can migrate your federations, self sign up, sign in, password reset. There is no profile edit at the moment, and you can migrate all your MCell configurations. MCell is the Microsoft library that the app uses to talk to Entra. Okay, so how would you do this? So obviously, very, very simplistic way is you can use Graph API. You can read all the users, you can write all the users, and then you can send all the users an email saying, dude, we have migrated you, please go and reset your password. Now, that's not a very good plan if you've got a ton of users. Another way is to migrate the users, but set them up in Entra External ID so that they use email OTP, right? So now you don't have passwords, so that solves that problem, right? And there's some other ways that I'm going to go through now, which is using an Azure function, a hybrid approach, just-in-time migration, and the migration tool. So if you've got a custom policy at the moment, you can imagine that inside your custom policy, there's a call that says read user by object ID. Now you can take that call out and put in a graph API call, and the graph API call goes to CIAM, which is on the right-hand side, going through an Azure function. So now you're still using the custom policies, but all the users and all the action is happening inside of Entra External ID. And so that means everything is ready for the final migration when you migrate the app over. And when they turn off B2C, you've done a ton of preparation already. Another alternative, and this hasn't got to GA yet, but it's been talked about. You can imagine one of the things they've done is they've put Entra External ID, the tenant, into an Azure AD B2C tenant. So B2C apps talk to the B2C endpoints, and Entra External ID apps talk to the Entra ID external endpoint. The artifacts are slightly different, as I've just discussed. The app registrations are exactly the same because it's still client secret and client ID and all that good stuff. But they're in the same user directory, so there is no migration. You could reset a password on the B2C app, and you could log in with that new password on the Entra ID app. So that's another approach that you can look at. Now, just-in-time password migration is something that they have introduced to do just-in-time migration when the user logs in for the first time. So basically, imagine you've migrated all the users over. You can't migrate the passwords, so you've given everyone a random password in Entra External ID. So the first thing you do is you migrate them with this random password. Now, the user signs in, so step 2. And then what happens is we ask the user to log in, and they are going to use their B2C password, which doesn't match the password in Entra External ID. And at the same time, when we migrated them, we set an extension attribute, something like require migration equals true. So if the passwords don't match and the flag is set, that causes a kick into a custom authentication extension that calls a Azure function, and the password and the email is passed across to this Azure function. It's encrypted, so the Azure function has to decrypt it. And that function then calls B2C and says, is this a valid credential? If it is a valid credential, we then take the password that they were using in B2C and we write it to Entra External ID. So now we have seamlessly migrated the password from B2C to Entra External ID, and it's done seamlessly, transparently, just in time, whatever words you want to use. Okay, so that's kind of a background of where we were until they introduced the migration kit. So the migration kit is a massive GitHub sample that has all kinds of stuff in it, and really, it'd probably take you 2 to 3 days to really get through everything. So the 3 key components are a kind of rich set of CLI tools with 5 bulk migration commands. So export, import, harvest, worker migrate, and phone registration. And I'll discuss the last 3 soon. We've got the Azure function that I've just told you about. And there's a whole lot of PowerShell and C# and core services that are shared across the whole kit. So there are 2 modes. There's a simple mode and there's an advanced mode. And the kit really is, at the moment, is primarily around users and passwords. So the first step is you run a script that exports all the B2C users to blob storage, and it puts it into different blobs. So maybe 200 at a time in each blob section. And the idea behind that is because Graph API has throttling. So you do one blob, wait a while, next blob, wait a while, next blob, wait a while. Once you've exported the whole lot to blob storage, you then import them into Entra External ID from blobs. So you run another script which goes and reads all the blob storage, all the attributes, and imports them into Entra External ID. Obviously, the passwords are just random. So when the user logs in, you can get the just-in-time password migration that I discussed earlier. Now, the advanced mode basically is around phone numbers, MFA, and all that kind of thing. So what it does is it gets the B2C user IDs and it enqueues them in batches, but not Azure storage, not blob storage. It puts them into a queue. And then the worker migrate takes out the IDs, fetches those IDs, fetches the user information from B2C, creates them in Entra ID, and gets all the phone and MFA information and then queues that on another queue. And then the phone registration fetches all those details from B2C and registers them in EID. And obviously that is all throttled using all kinds of throttle mechanisms that are built into the kit and are configurable. So there are a ton of scripts in this thing. For example, at the top, you've got configure Entra External ID. That sets up all the stuff that we've been talking about. It sets up keys because you need keys to encrypt. It sets up the custom auth extension. It sets up the event listeners. It sets up app registrations, creates a test app for you to use for testing. It does a ton of stuff, right? And then on the right-hand side, you can see at the top, start local export, local harvest, local import. So those are all the scripts, and it's all PowerShell. So again, you can change it to suit your requirements. So that, yeah, like I said, there's a ton of scripts. And there's a massive app settings.json. So it has different sections. So we have an export section where you can select what you want to export. You don't have to export everything. And you can see that you can export extension attributes. We have an import section in the JSON. So we can map stuff. For example, in B2C, we call this extension attribute legacy ID. Well, that doesn't make sense anymore. So let's rather call it custom ID in extension in Entra External ID. We can exclude fields that we don't want to migrate, and we can add extra attributes. So for example, we can store the B2C object ID in the Entra ID user. So we now have a link between the user in Entra External and the user in B2C. So if we need to do any troubleshooting or anything like that, we have this link between the two. That's the flag, that's the name we're going to use, for the just-in-time, and then we can tell the toolkit the name of the attribute that is used for just-in-time. Now I'm just going to. Now, unfortunately, I cannot. Where is? Why can't I see? No. Why can't I see my browser?
I think you need to, yeah.
You can see that?
I can see the browser. Yep, I can see.
Okay, so the problem is that if I run the script, it exposes a ton of tenant information that I don't want to expose because it's being recorded. So this is in my blog. So this is how I'm just going to so here are the keys that you use for encryption. And there's a script that does all that. And then down here, you start running the keys and it'll tell you it's created. It creates self-signed certs. Okay, and then you have to do some work here about copying these keys into the app settings.json, do a bit of work with the custom attributes. Then when you try and run the script, it uses device code authentication. So it does that, and you set up permissions and stuff. And then it starts running the script, right? So the first thing it does is the authentication. It configures the custom extension apps, configures all kinds of stuff, sets up all, gives it admin consent, API permissions. It configures the encryption certificate. It creates the custom extension policy. It creates the test client for you. It creates the event listener. And then it gives you a whole summary down the bottom. And then it tells you, hey, you need to go and do all this stuff next. Okay, so there's a ton of stuff there that you can get into. All right, so just hang on, let me go and share my screen again. All right, and I just want to. All right, so this is the local export. So this is the script that does the export. And so it validates that you've got a config file. It detects if your emulator is running, if you want to run it locally, creates the blob storage, rebuilds everything and runs it. And so you can see there's a ton of stuff in the configuration file. You can set up your password policy. This is where you configure your B2C stuff, your B2C, your tenant name and app registrations. The same for there, Entra External ID, what storage you're going to be using. If you want to run it in production, obviously use key vaults. You can set up retries and delays for throttling, all the kind of extension attributes and stuff, the size of the batches, the size of the pages. And then when you run the script, it basically starts the export and you can see it just reads through the users. And at the end, I only did 4 because I don't want hours and hours of migrating users. So, and then because we talk about B2C, we have millions and millions of users. It gives you all kinds of projections for, obviously not very accurate if you only got 4 users, but how long it would take for 1 million users, right? So it's going to take a fair amount of time, but it does give you a whole lot of good stuff. And then at the bottom, it gives you a summary. So there were 4 users that we imported into Blob, none failed, none skipped. We didn't need to throttle in. Okay, so that is the export. And now if we go and look at the import, so basically it does the same kind of stuff, does a whole lot of checks, and then it starts to run and it goes through every user one by one. And so it goes through, check stuff, it makes sure all your target, you need to make sure that all your custom attributes are already set up in Entra External ID. And then it finds one file to processing 4 users. Now, Entra External ID has to have an email address. So if you don't have an email address in B2C, it tells you that it's going to use the UPN as an email fallback because you have to have an email address. So it goes through every user and tells you, did it work? Did it not work? This is what was wrong. So you can go through, fix the problems, run it again. And I ran this on users that I'd already basically imported. So it just it processed 4 users, but didn't actually import any. Okay, so that's how that script works. Now, if I go back to here and start from current slide. All right, now there's 2 ways of running this. The one way is running it in test, so you can go through a whole lot of stuff before you actually do the import and the export. And there's a way of actually running it in the cloud. So when you're running it locally, you can run your Azure function locally. You can use local keys. Obviously, B2C and Entra External ID need to talk to your local host, so you have to use ngrok, which is just a proxy. And you use the Azure Blob Storage emulator. So you can do everything locally, the just-in-time, the Azure function, everything you want to, and it'll just work. When you run it in production, and there's actually a script that swaps the 2, so you can go test production as you find errors and as you fix them. So obviously the Azure function runs in the cloud. We're not going to be using local keys. Of course, we're going to be using Key Vault. We don't need ngrok because it's all in the cloud, so there's no problem with access. And we are going to use Azure Blob Storage, right? The real Azure Blob Storage or the real Azure Q Storage. And at the end of it, again, this could take quite a long time depending on how many users. But again, you don't have to do them all at once. You can say, just import, export this number of users, do a bit of checking, do the next blob, do the next blob, do the next blob as you wish. So you can stage it, and hopefully at the end of it, you have moved all your users from B2C to Entra External ID. And then the last step is you take your application, which is using AMSL, And inside there, there's a JSON file that contains the tenant ID, the tenant name, the client ID, and the client secret. And you replace those four with the equivalent information in Entra External ID. And then basically you've switched over. And when the user signs in for the first time, they use that just-in-time migration that I showed you to migrate their password. And so basically from then on, you are now running in Entra External ID. And so when they turn it off, okay, it's all good because everything's been migrated. Okay, I have some references. Now, if you want to see these slides and actually get the references, you just have to Google Rory Braybrook presentations, and there will be a link in there to the slide deck, and inside the slide deck are all these references. So yeah, how are we on time? So 25 minutes, that's cool. Ahmed, are there any questions?
Yeah, I see a question from Matt here. The question is, migration script seems rather complicated. How does the migration process handle human error and where you might have missed like a line of code in the script or made a typo and so on? So like it's basically about like troubleshooting and how smooth is the migration?
Yeah, so there is a whole lot of tooling to do logging, and which I haven't discussed. So there's a ton of stuff about how you log it, how much you log, which you can use to debug it. In terms of making a mistake in the script, yeah, I mean, basically you can just use the scripts as they are. I didn't change the scripts. But if you, at the end of the import and export, there is a summary. It does have the errors. The errors are highlighted inside the script when it's running. So you can use that, or you can go and look at all your all the logs that you've created.
Nice.
But again, you know, I mean, the way to do it would be to, you know, run it in test first, make sure that it's all good, and then run maybe one batch, because remember at this point no one's using Entra External ID, and you're not ever writing to B2C, so you're not screwing anything up. So maybe run one batch, see how that goes, run the next one, see how it goes, and then slowly build up to, you know, actually migrating the whole lot.
Yeah, that is brilliant. And a question of mine, which is like, how do you see Entra ID External ID? How do you see it compared to B2C? Have we lost any like some functionality or flexibility that was only B2C, or do you see Entra ID External ID actually much better solution?
So at the moment, Entra External ID is not feature complete with B2C, but they are adding stuff all the time. So it is getting more and more and more feature complete. And it also, obviously there's things that they're going to add, things like pass keys, things like you know, Microsoft Authenticator, all these things are on the roadmap, which will never be in B2C because B2C is code complete. So all the modern, shall we say, security features are in Entra External ID. The big one is the custom policies, because they allow you to create workflows. And I don't think Microsoft has actually documented recommended approaches for custom policies yet.
Yeah. It always that always happens when like a tool, you migrate to a new one. There's a lot of customization that you might end up losing, and it takes a while for the new modern approach to catch up. Sometimes some of the old customization is no longer needed. So because the new technology has like removed the need for that. I don't see any other questions. That's all good. Thank you, Rory. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. And yeah, there's 2 minutes left to the half hour. So
is there a place for people to reach out to you or communicate? It's just like search Rory and then they can reach out.
So if you just search Medium Rory Braybrook, you'll see my blog. You can, if you look for me on Authory, you can ask me questions, or else you could just connect with me on LinkedIn. There's only one Rory Braybrook in LinkedIn.
Yeah, that is brilliant. Yeah, I really encourage people to reach out to Rory for any questions, or if you need Rory help in something that you're currently working on, look him up. He is, as I said, he is the identity guy, and he's got tons and tons of experience there. So thank you so much, Rory, again. And yeah, thank you for your time.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
See you, mate.